Sylvia stepped off the chopper like a queen, dragging my spineless husband behind her. She threw open the heavy oak doors, expecting crystal chandeliers, but her smug smile vanished. Instead of a marble fireplace, she faced rows of sterile glass cages and cold, beeping machinery. I stood there holding a thick medical file. Not champagne. Welcome to the quarantine zone. Sylvia, don't touch anything unless you want to be a lab rat. My name is Alina Hartwell, and for the last 72 hours, I have been living at the edge of the world. The summit does not look like a place where miracles happen. To the few locals in the village 2,000 feet below, it is just an old, stone-faced fortress clinging to the jagged granite jaw of the Swiss Alps, a relic of some forgotten aristocracy that preferred isolation to society. They see the slate roof heavy with snow and the formidable iron gates, and they imagine a recluse hiding from the world. They are partially right. I am hiding, but not from the world. I am hiding from a mistake I made 5 years ago that goes by the name of Mrs. Sylvia Sterling. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass of my private observation deck, watching a storm brew over the Matterhorn. The wind howled against the pane, a savage, primal sound that usually made me feel safe, insulated by layers of thermal glass and millions of dollars of security technology. I took a sip of lukewarm herbal tea, my eyes scanning the stark white horizon before turning back to the glowing monitors behind me. I am not a woman who inherited her fortune. I did not stumble into wealth through a trust fund or a lucky marriage. I built Aura Bio from the ground up, starting with nothing but a scholarship, a terrifying amount of ambition, and the kind of hunger that only comes from growing up with absolutely nothing. I was an orphan who learned early on that the only person coming to save you is the one you see in the mirror. Now, at 34 years old, I was the CEO of one of the leading biotechnology firms in the world. My specialty was not just medicine, it was restoration. We specialized in bioregenerative technology for veterans and high-performance athletes who had suffered catastrophic injuries. We did not just heal wounds, we rebuilt lives. Here, in the silence of the Alps, I was attempting to finish Project Phoenix. I walked over to the central console, where a three-dimensional model of a human nervous system floated in the air, rendered in soft blue light. This was the crown jewel of my career. It was a neural integration interface designed to bridge the gap between severed biological nerves and advanced prosthetics. If I could get the latency down by just 0.04 seconds, we would not just be giving a veteran a robotic arm, we would be giving them the ability to feel the warmth of a coffee cup or the texture of their child's hair again. It was delicate, exhausting work that required absolute, unbroken concentration. That was something I could never get in New York. My life was a constant, draining performance. I had to play the role of the successful CEO during the day and the dutiful, patient wife at night. But lately, the role of the wife has become a horror show. My mind drifted from the complex neural pathways on the screen to the memory of the night I decided to leave. It was 2 weeks ago. We were at a charity gala. I was exhausted, having just come off a 16-hour flight from Tokyo. Ethan, my husband, looked dashing in his tuxedo, the picture of the supportive partner. But then there was Sylvia. My mother-in-law had worn a dress that cost more than my first car. A dress she had charged to my personal account without asking. She stood in the center of a circle of my business rivals, holding court, laughing loudly, and telling them about the vacation home in the Hamptons she was planning to buy, a home she expected me to pay for. Ethan had just stood there, smiling that weak, apologetic smile that I used to mistake for gentleness. When I pulled him aside and whispered that we could not afford to liquidate assets for another vanity property, he shrugged. "Come on, Alina," he had said, his voice devoid of any backbone. "It makes her happy. You know she had a hard life. Besides, you make so much money. What is a few million to you?" That was the moment the glass shattered. It wasn't the money. I have plenty of money. It was the entitlement. It was the realization that to the Sterling family, I was not a person. I was not a wife or a daughter-in-law. I was a resource, I was a golden goose they were happy to pluck until I bled. As long as I kept laying the eggs, I had looked at Ethan, really looked at him, and I saw a man who would never stand up for me. He was 36 years old, yet he was still a boy hiding behind his mother's skirt, terrified of her disapproval, but perfectly comfortable spending my earnings to buy her affection. So, I ran. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene. I simply made arrangements. I told my board of directors that I needed a sabbatical for deep research on Project Phoenix. I had my lawyers quietly begin the process of untangling our finances, a forensic accounting of every cent Sylvia had siphoned off over the years, and then I bought the summit. I bought it through a shell company, a blind trust that led nowhere. I told no one where I was going, not even Ethan, especially not Ethan. I needed silence. I needed the cold, hard clarity of the mountains to decide how I was going to end my marriage without destroying the company I had spent my entire adult life building. The summit was perfect. From the outside, it looked like a rustic, 19th century hunting lodge. It had stone walls, timber framing, and heavy wooden shutters. It looked like the kind of place where you would drink hot cocoa and read old books, but that was just the shell. Inside, I had gutted the structure. The interior was a marvel of modern engineering, a fully functional Class 4 biohazard research facility masked as a home. There were no plush carpets or velvet drapes here. The floors were polished concrete and antimicrobial resin. The air was cycled through hospital-grade filtration systems every 15 minutes. The basement was not a wine cellar. It was a server farm and a cryogenics lab. The living room was a triage center where I could test the new prosthetics with the small team of volunteers I had flown in veterans who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. It was clinical. It was cold. It was efficient. It was exactly how I liked things. I tapped a command on the keyboard, and the holographic nerves pulsed, simulating a successful connection. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The simulation was holding stable at 98% efficiency. This was it. This was the breakthrough. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a soft, pulsating red light. A low digital chime echoed through the lab, cutting through the hum of the servers. It was the perimeter alarm. My brow furrowed. I was miles from civilization. The road leading up to the summit was treacherous, a winding ribbon of black ice and sheer drops that terrified even the local delivery drivers. I had given strict orders: no deliveries, no visitors, no disturbances. "System," I said, my voice echoing in the large, sterile room. "Report? Motion detected in Sector 4, the automated voice replied, cool and detached. Vehicle approaching via the access road. I frowned. It was likely a lost tourist, or perhaps a maintenance crew for the power lines. Though the weather was turning foul enough to ground even the most ambitious workers, I wiped my hands on a sterile towel and walked over to the security wall. A bank of high-definition monitors that fed live footage from the cameras hidden in the trees and rocks surrounding the property. "Show me camera 4, I commanded. The center screen flickered to life. The image was crisp, despite the falling snow. A car was grinding its way up the switchbacks. It was not a utility truck. It was a massive, black SUV, sleek and shiny, looking completely out of place against the rugged, wild backdrop of the Alps. It was driving aggressively, taking the corners too fast, the tires slipping on the ice before the traction control kicked in. I narrowed my eyes. That was a rental, a very expensive, luxury rental. As the car drew closer to the main gate, the camera zoomed in automatically on the license plate, and then, through the windshield, the driver was gripping the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his face pale as he navigated a particularly dangerous turn. My heart stopped, then hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was Ethan, and in the passenger seat, pointing imperiously at the road ahead, wearing a fur coat that probably cost more than the annual salary of the average Swiss citizen, was Sylvia. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of cold. White-hot rage. How had they found me? I had covered my tracks. I had used burner phones, private jets, Shell corporations? Then, I remembered the tracking app on my old phone, the one Ethan had insisted we install for safety years ago. I had left that phone in New York, powered down in a drawer, but if I had turned it on for even a second to check a two-factor authentication code, or if Ethan had hired a private investigator who was better than I gave him credit for. No, Ethan was not that smart, and Sylvia was too cheap to hire a good investigator. I watched as the SUV skidded to a halt in front of the massive iron gates of the villa. They were here. They had actually flown across the Atlantic, rented a car, and driven up a mountain in a snowstorm. I leaned closer to the screen. Sylvia was saying something, gesturing wildly, even without audio. I could read her lips. She was complaining. She was likely complaining about the snow, the road, and the lack of a welcoming committee. She looked at the villa, my sanctuary, my laboratory, with a look of greedy possession. She did not see a research facility. She saw a castle. She saw a prize. I watched Ethan step out of the car. He looked small against the towering pines. He walked around to open the door for his mother. Slipping slightly on the ice, Sylvia emerged, pulling her fur coat tighter around herself. She looked up at the house and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It was the smile of a conqueror who believes the war is already won. They began to unload luggage, not just an overnight bag. They were pulling out suitcase after suitcase, Louis Vuitton trunks, hard-shell cases, hat boxes. They were not here for a visit. They were moving in. My hands curled into fists at my sides. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything, after the financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, the silence I had begged for, they had chased me down to the top of the world to claim what they believed was theirs. I looked around my lab. I looked at the centrifuges, the biohazard warning signs, the rows of prosthetics that looked like something out of a science fiction nightmare to the uninitiated. I looked at the quarantine zone signs I had posted on the internal airlocks. A slow, dark amusement began to bubble up under my anger. Sylvia wanted a palace. She wanted to be the queen of the winter court. She expected me to come running out with an apology and a warm fire. She expected a staff of servants and a 5-course meal. I reached out and pressed the button on the console that controlled the front gate. "You want in, Sylvia," I whispered to the screen, watching the heavy iron gates begin to creak open slowly, inviting them into the belly of the beast. "Fine, come on in." I turned away from the monitors and picked up the thick file containing the latest test results for Project Phoenix. I did not smooth my hair. I did not change out of my stark white lab coat. I did not put on the welcoming face of Alina the wife. I walked toward the main entrance of the facility, the sound of my sensible rubber-soled shoes echoing on the cold concrete. They thought they were breaking into a vacation home to ambush a runaway wife. They had no idea they were walking straight into a high-security bio-research facility run by a woman who had finally run out of patience. The peace was over. The storm had arrived, but for the first time in 5 years, I was not afraid of the thunder. I was the lightning. I watched the black SUV crawl the final 50 yards of the driveway, its tires crunching heavily over the pristine layer of snow that I had deliberately left uncleared. From my vantage point behind the reinforced steel of the front entrance, observing the high-definition security feed, the vehicle looked like a dark beetle intruding on a white canvas. It came to a halt right in front of the main portico, the engine cutting out with a shudder that seemed to echo in the absolute silence of the mountain. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the passenger door flew open with aggressive force. Sylvia Sterling emerged. She did not step out. She descended. She was wrapped in a floor-length fur coat that looked like it had been skinned from a polar bear, a garment so ostentatious and ethically questionable that it could only belong to her. She planted her high-heeled boots into the snow, immediately grimacing as the expensive leather sank 2 inches into the powder. "Ethan," her voice cut through the biting alpine air, picked up clearly by the sensitive external microphones I had installed to monitor wildlife. "Ethan, get the bags, all of them, and be careful with my vanity case. It is fragile." My husband scrambled out of the driver's seat. He looked exhausted. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with red, likely from the strain of driving up a mountain road that was essentially a goat path paved with ice. He wore a designer wool coat that was too thin for this altitude, shivering visibly as the wind whipped around the stone corners of the villa. "I am getting them. Mom, just give me a second," Ethan muttered, rushing to the trunk. What happened next was a spectacle of absurdity that almost made me laugh. Had I not been so consumed by a cold, calculating rage? Ethan began to unload the trunk. He pulled out suitcase after suitcase. 1, 2, 5, 10. The pile grew on the snowy driveway like a monument to their greed. They were all stamped with the signature monogram of Louis Vuitton, a collection that represented tens of thousands of dollars money that I knew for a fact Ethan did not have. Sylvia ignored his struggle. She turned her back on him, shielding her eyes with a gloved hand as she surveyed the facade of the summit. She looked up at the gray stone walls, the towering chimneys, and the slate roof, nodding with a satisfied smirk. "Well," Sylvia said, loud enough for the mountains to hear. "I have to say, the girl finally listened. I told her last Christmas that the Hamptons were too pedestrian. I told her the Sterlings deserve something with history, something with grandeur." She walked toward the massive oak front doors, running a gloved hand over a stone gargoyle perched near the entrance. "The road up here is an absolute disgrace. Though," she continued, shouting back at Ethan, who was struggling to balance 3 suitcases at once, "we will have to have that paved immediately, heated asphalt, I think, and we need to cut down those pine trees blocking the south view. I want the sun to hit the breakfast terrace in the morning." I stood on the other side of the door, my hand hovering over the intercom button. She was already renovating. She had been on the property for less than 3 minutes, and she was already tearing down trees and pouring asphalt. She spoke with the absolute, unshakable confidence of an owner. "It is a bit isolated, Mom," Ethan panted, dragging the luggage up the stone steps to the porch. "Are you sure you will like it here?" "It is very quiet," Sylvia laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Oh, Ethan, do not be naive. It is quiet now because we have not invited anyone yet. Once we settle in, this will be the winter destination. Can you imagine the envy on Beatrice's face when she sees photos of me on this balcony? This is not just a house. Ethan, this is an apology." My finger froze over the button. "An apology." "An apology?" Ethan asked, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. "Of course," Sylvia scoffed, adjusting her fur collar. "Alina ran off, made a dramatic scene, and disappeared. Why? Because she realized she was wrong to deny me that cottage. She realized she was being a selfish, ungrateful brat. So, she went out and bought this palace to make it up to me. It is a grand gesture. Ethan, she knows that the only way to get back into my good graces is to present me with something worthy of the Sterling name." The sheer delusion was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic mental gymnastics. In Sylvia's world, I had not fled a toxic marriage to build a life-saving research facility. No, in her mind, I had gone on a shopping spree to buy her forgiveness. She honestly believed that I had spent millions of dollars on a Swiss villa just to grovel at her feet. She stepped up to the door, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She reached out and pressed the doorbell. It was an old-fashioned, heavy brass button. The chime echoed through the facility, a deep, resonant bong that clashed horribly with the sterile, electronic hum of my laboratory equipment. I did not answer. She waited 5 seconds, then pressed it again. And again, then she leaned on it. Bong, 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 bong. The sound was relentless, a rhythmic demand for attention that I had heard 1,000 times before in my own home in New York. "Alina," Sylvia shrieked at the closed door. "Alina, stop playing games. We saw the lights inside. Open this door immediately. It is freezing out here." I took a deep breath, composing myself. I wanted my voice to be steady. I wanted it to be as cold and unyielding as the granite beneath the foundation. I pressed the talk button on the intercom panel. "Identify yourself," I said. My voice was amplified by the external speakers, crisp and metallic, stripping away any warmth. Outside. Sylvia jumped back slightly, startled by the disembodied voice, but she recovered instantly. She glared at the camera lens mounted above the doorframe. "Identify myself. Are you out of your mind?" Sylvia sputtered, her face flushing red with indignation. "It is Sylvia, your mother-in-law, and your husband. Now unlock this door before I catch pneumonia. Do you have any idea how difficult that drive was?" "I know exactly how difficult the drive is," I replied calmly. "That is why the road is marked private and no trespassing at the bottom of the valley. You are on private property. State your business." Ethan stepped forward. Looking anxious, he leaned toward the intercom, trying to use his reasonable voice, the one he used when he wanted me to sign a check. "Alina, honey, please," Ethan said, his teeth chattering. "Let's not do this over the intercom. Mom is really cold. We have been traveling for 2 days to find you. We are exhausted. Just let us in, and we can talk about whatever is bothering you." "I asked for your business," I repeated, ignoring his plea. "Why are you here, Ethan?" "Why are we here?" Sylvia interrupted, shoving Ethan aside. She pressed her face close to the camera, her eyes distorted and wide on my monitor. "We are here to live. Obviously. Look at all this luggage. We gave up the lease on the apartment in the city because we knew you had bought this place. We are moving in. Alina, we are here to turn this drafty old castle into a home. Now stop this nonsense and open the door." They gave up the lease. The information hit me with the force of a physical blow. They had not just come for a vacation, they had burned their bridges. They had vacated their apartment, which, I reminded myself, I had paid the rent on for the last 3 years, and had come here with the full intention of never leaving. They were parasites who had consumed their host and were now migrating to a fresh body. "You assumed," I said softly, though the microphone picked it up clearly, "that you could just show up at a property I own, uninvited, and move in?" "We are family," Ethan shouted, his patience fraying. "Alina, you are my wife. What is yours is ours. That is how marriage works. You do not just disappear and buy a castle in the Alps without telling us. Mom is right. This is ridiculous. Open the door right now, or I swear to God, I will break a window." "You will not break a window," I informed him, checking the structural readouts on my screen. "The glass is ballistic-grade polycarbonate. If you hit it, you will break your hand, and if you attempt to force entry, the automated security system will alert the local police cantonal. They take trespassing very seriously here." Sylvia let out a noise that was half growl, half scream. She turned to Ethan. "Do something. Do not let her speak to me like that. She is humiliating us." Ethan looked at the door, then up at the camera, his expression shifting from pleading to angry. "Alina, this has gone on long enough. Mom is shivering. She is an old woman. Do you really want her to freeze to death on your doorstep? Is that who you have become? A heartless monster." I looked at the monitor. Sylvia was indeed shivering, pulling her fur tighter, but it wasn't the shivering of a frail old woman. It was the shivering of a predator denied its kill. However, Ethan's words struck a chord, not guilt. I was far past guilt, but strategy. If I left them out here, they would eventually leave. They would drive back down the mountain, check into a hotel, and start a legal war. They would play the victims in the press. They would say I abandoned my elderly mother-in-law in a snowstorm. They would make my life a public hell, and the noise would disrupt my work on Project Phoenix. But if I let them in, they would see the truth. They would see that there was no luxury here. They would see that their palace was a workplace. I could force them to confront the reality of who I was and what I did. I could make their stay so uncomfortable, so strictly regulated, and so utterly devoid of the glamour they craved that they would beg to leave. I could trap them in their own greed. "Fine," I said. The single word hung in the air like a sentence. Sylvia let out a triumphant huff. "Finally, good Lord, The drama with this girl. Ethan, get the bags. I want the master suite on the top floor. I saw a balcony up there that will be perfect for my morning tea. Wait, I commanded. Leave the bags. Excuse me, Sylvia snapped. Leave the luggage outside, I said. You can bring it in later after you have been processed. I am opening the door. Do not expect a warm welcome. I reached out and punched in the release code. The heavy locking mechanisms of the front door disengaged with a series of loud, mechanical thuds. Clank, clank, clank. It sounded more like a prison cell opening than a front door. The massive oak panels, reinforced with steel cores, swung inward slowly, moved by silent hydraulics. A gust of wind blew into the entryway, carrying a few snowflakes with it. Sylvia did not wait for Ethan. She did not wait for an invitation. As soon as the gap was wide enough for her body, she shoved her son hard against the doorframe to get him out of her way. Move, you idiot, she hissed at him. She stepped over the threshold with her head held high, a conqueror claiming new territory. Her eyes were already scanning the space, eager to criticize the decor, eager to claim the best furniture, eager to rule. Honey, I am home, she announced, her voice dripping with sarcastic sweetness as she strode into the vestibule. She had no idea that she had just walked into the belly of a machine. She thought she was entering a living room. She was actually entering Decontamination Zone Alpha. The door swung shut behind them automatically, sealing with a final, airtight hiss that cut off the sound of the wind completely. They were inside, and now they were mine. The heavy hydraulic hiss of the front door sealing shut cut off the howling wind instantly, leaving a silence so absolute it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing against the eardrums. The sudden drop in auditory chaos was disorienting. Outside, nature was screaming. Inside, the air was still, pressurized, and controlled. I stood at the top of the mezzanine gallery, hidden by the shadows of the ventilation ducts. Looking down at the atrium, this was the moment I had curated. This was the reveal. Sylvia stood in the center of the intake lobby, her arms still slightly outstretched, as if she were ready to embrace an adoring crowd of servants. The smile on her face was frozen, a grotesque mask of anticipation that began to crack, splinter, and finally shatter as her eyes actually registered what was in front of her. She had expected the warm, golden glow of a fireplace, perhaps a grand staircase draped in red velvet, or a crystal chandelier casting prisms of light onto antique oil paintings. She had expected the smell of roasted chestnuts, expensive beeswax polish, and potpourri. She had expected a fantasy. Instead, she was standing in a cathedral of science. The space was vast. Yes, but it was the vastness of a high-tech hangar. Not a ballroom. The walls were not paneled in mahogany. They were clad in sound-dampening acoustic foam and brushed aluminum panels that gleamed with a cold. Sterile light. There was no fireplace. In its place, dominating the far wall, was a massive, backlit liquid crystal display stretching 20 feet high, currently displaying a rotating three-dimensional schematic of a human spinal column. The vertebrae were highlighted in pulsing blue light, with red indicators marking severance points. The floor beneath Sylvia's muddy boots was not Persian wool. It was a continuous sheet of white epoxy resin, poured seamlessly to prevent bacterial growth, polished to a mirror shine that reflected her bewildered expression back at her. What? Sylvia's voice was small, stripped of its usual booming authority by the sheer alien nature of the environment. She spun around, her fur coat flapping comically against the clinical starkness of the room. Ethan, where are we? Ethan, standing just behind her, looked equally lost. He blinked rapidly, his eyes darting from the biometric scanners at the turnstiles to the rows of decontamination showers visible through a glass partition on the left. I do not know. Mom, Ethan stammered, his voice echoing too loudly in the acoustic chamber. The GPS said, "This is the address. The summit. This has to be it." "This cannot be it," Sylvia shrieked, the sound tearing through the quiet. "Look at this place. It looks like a hospital or a morgue. She took a few tentative steps forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hard floor. The sound was distinct, click-clack, click-clack. It sounded like gunfire in the silence. She approached the walls, hoping to find some redeeming feature, perhaps a piece of art hidden among the strangeness. But there was no art. I had decorated the lobby with what I found beautiful data. Framed along the corridor were not landscapes, but high-resolution macro photographs of nerve regeneration, complex mathematical proofs of my proprietary algorithms, and detailed blueprints of prosthetic interfaces. Sylvia stopped in front of a large, backlit diagram of a dissected human leg musculature. She stared at the red and blue lines of veins and arteries, her face twisting in disgust. "Gross," she whispered, recoiling. "Why would anyone hang this? It is hideous." Then, the smell hit her. I saw her nose twitch. She sniffed the air, expecting Chanel No. 5, or perhaps the scent of fresh roses. "What is that smell?" she demanded, wrinkling her nose as if she had stepped in something foul. "It smells like bleach and rubbing alcohol. It burns my nose." "It is ozone and medical-grade antiseptic," I whispered to myself from my perch. "Welcome to a sterile environment. Sylvia." She turned away from the wall, looking for a place to sit. She spotted the reception area, a long, curved desk made of stainless steel and frosted glass. It looked more like the bridge of a starship than a concierge desk. There were no plush armchairs nearby, only ergonomic waiting benches made of stiff, molded plastic designed for lumbar support, not relaxation. "Service," Sylvia yelled, her entitlement overriding her confusion for a moment. "Is there anyone working in this godforsaken freezer? We need help with the bags." "Hello." Her voice triggered the motion sensors in the hallway leading to the rehabilitation wing. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft swish. Sylvia straightened up, smoothing her hair. "Finally," she muttered to Ethan. "The staff is coming out. Stand up straight. Ethan, first impressions matter." But the people who emerged were not wearing black waistcoats and white gloves. They were not carrying silver trays of champagne. The first person to enter the lobby was Sergeant Major Marcus Vance. He was a mountain of a man, 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a face weathered by desert suns and shrapnel scars. He was wearing a gray compression tank top and athletic shorts, and he was missing his left leg and his right arm. Or rather, he was missing his biological limbs. In their place were the prototypes I was testing. His left leg was a sleek assembly of carbon fiber and titanium pistons that whirred softly as he walked. His right arm was even more advanced, a matte black skeletal structure with exposed servos and bundle of synthetic polymer muscles that contracted and expanded just like human tissue. Behind him came 2 others. Sarah, a former combat pilot who had lost both legs in a crash, was moving swiftly on dual-blade prosthetics, her movement fluid and powerful, and David, a young Marine who had lost his sight and part of his face to an IED, was navigating the room using a haptic feedback cane that hummed with ultrasonic sensors. They stopped when they saw the woman in the fur coat standing in the middle of their track. Sylvia did not see heroes. She did not see survivors. She did not see the millions of dollars of cutting-edge technology that was giving these people their lives back. She saw monsters. I watched the color drain from her face. It went from a flushed red to a sickly, paste-like gray in the span of 3 seconds. Her eyes bulged. She took a stumbling step backward, clutching her chest. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Ethan, look at them." Ethan turned and froze. He was a weak man, but he wasn't malicious in the way Sylvia was. He just looked uncomfortable, unsure where to look, his eyes fixing on the floor to avoid staring at Major Vance's mechanical arm. "Mom." "Shh," Ethan whispered, grabbing her elbow. "Be quiet." "Quiet," Sylvia hissed, pulling away. "Why are there crippled people here? This is supposed to be a private villa. Why are they walking around like they own the place? Where are the servants?" Major Vance, who had hearing acute enough to pick up the whisper of a falling pin thanks to his training, narrowed his eyes. He looked at Sylvia, then at the ridiculous pile of luggage visible through the glass of the front door. and then back at her. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look of utter disdain on his face was louder than any shout. He simply adjusted the torque on his robotic elbow, the servos whining high and sharp, and continued his walk across the lobby, ignoring her completely. Sylvia was shaking now. Whether it was from fear, cold, or rage, it was hard to tell. She backed up until she bumped into the reception desk. "This is a nightmare," she muttered. "This is a prank. Alina is playing a sick prank on me." She turned around to lean against the desk for support. That was when she saw it. Sitting on the stainless steel counter of the reception desk was Unit 734. It was a standalone prosthetic hand and forearm, stripped of its cosmetic casing to reveal the intricate clockwork of gold-plated circuits and silver tendons underneath. It was connected to a diagnostic laptop, undergoing a routine reflex calibration loop. As Sylvia leaned back, her fur coat brushed against the laptop's spacebar, the program was initiated. Unit 734 sprang to life. The metal fingers snapped open with a loud clack, then clenched into a tight fist. The wrist rotated 180 degrees with a mechanical grind, and the fingers began to drum rapidly on the metal desk surface, tap, 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 mimicking a nervous human tick. Sylvia didn't just jump. She screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek that bounced off the acoustic paneling and rang in the rafters. She flailed backward, tripping over her own boots and landing hard on her backside on the unforgiving epoxy floor. "It's alive!" she screamed, scrambling backward on her hands and heels like a crab, pointing a shaking finger at the mechanical hand that was still innocently tapping its fingers on the desk. "Get it away from me! It tried to grab me, Ethan! Kill it! Kill it!" Ethan rushed over to help her up, but he was looking at the robotic hand with wide, terrified eyes, as if he expected it to leap off the desk and strangle him. "Mom, Mom, get up! It is just a machine." "It looked at me," Sylvia wailed, completely losing her composure. Her carefully coiffed hair was now in disarray, and her fur coat was sprawled around her on the floor. "Where is Alina? Where is that wretched girl? She did this on purpose. She set a trap." She scrambled to her feet, her face contorted with fury. She spun in a circle, shouting at the empty air. "Alina, show yourself! How dare you? How dare you bring me to this house of horrors? Where is the real house? Where is the villa I saw in the pictures? You lied to me. You tricked me." I decided it was time. I stepped out of the shadows of the mezzanine and began my descent down the spiral steel staircase that led to the lobby. I made sure my footsteps were audible, calm, measured, authoritative. "I did not lie, Sylvia," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the space without the need to shout. "You assumed." Sylvia and Ethan whipped their heads around. I walked into the light of the atrium. I was not wearing the silk robe or the cashmere loungewear that Sylvia would have expected of a woman on a retreat. I was wearing my work uniform, a crisp, tailored white lab coat over a slate-gray turtleneck and tactical trousers. My hair was pulled back in a severe, tight bun, secured with a graphite stick. I held a tablet in one hand and a stylus in the other. I wore no makeup, no jewelry, and absolutely no warmth in my expression. I stopped 10 feet away from them, maintaining a sterile distance. "Alina," Ethan breathed, staring at me. He looked confused by my appearance. He had never seen me like this. In New York, I was always dressed to impress his business partners or to fit into his mother's aesthetic. Here, I looked like what I was, the director of a facility that dealt with life and death. "What is this?" Sylvia demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the room, at the veterans who had stopped to watch, and finally at the twitching robot hand. "What is this sick joke? Where are the chandeliers? Where is the staff? Where is the champagne?" I looked at her coolly. I tapped the screen of my tablet, shutting down the calibration program for Unit 734. The hand went limp on the desk. "There are no chandeliers." "Sylvia," I said, my tone flat and factual. "There is no champagne, and the only staff here are neurologists, biomechanical engineers, and security personnel." I gestured to the vast, cold space around us. "You wanted to know where my money went. You wanted to know what I was doing while you were planning luncheons and buying handbags. This is it. I took a step closer, my eyes locking onto hers. This is not a vacation home. This is not a villa for your winter parties. This is the Aura Bio Research Center, European branch. It is a Class 4 medical facility for advanced prosthetics and neural integration. I paused, letting the words sink in. You are not standing in the living room, Sylvia. You are standing in a waiting room, and quite frankly, you are contaminating my sterile field. Sylvia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked from me to the cold steel walls, attempting to process the reality that there was no luxury awaiting her. There was no master suite with a view of the sunset. Only patient recovery rooms and laboratories. But, she sputtered, her voice weak, but the invoice cost $10 million. $12 million, I corrected her. And every cent of it went into the equipment you see around you, not into velvet curtains or gold-plated toilets. You selfish witch, Sylvia finally found her voice, screaming the words. You bought a hospital just to spite me. I bought a research center to save lives, I replied calmly. The fact that it disappoints you is just a very pleasant bonus. I looked at Ethan. He was still staring at the robot hand, looking pale and sick. Welcome to my world, Ethan, I said. It is cold, it is hard, and it has absolutely no room for tourists. Now, pick up your mother. She is making a scene in front of my patients. Sylvia stood up, brushing the imaginary dust from her fur coat with aggressive, jerky movements. The sheer force of her denial was a psychological marvel to behold. I watched her reset her facial expression, smoothing out the lines of terror and replacing them with a look of skeptical amusement. She had decided, in that twisted logic center of her brain, that this was all an elaborate ruse. She refused to accept that her long journey had ended in a medical waiting room. Very funny, Alina, Sylvia said, letting out a forced, trilling laugh that sounded like glass breaking in a garbage disposal. You have had your little joke. You scared me with the robot hand. Bravo, I admit. My heart is racing. But now, let us stop playing games. I am exhausted, and I need to see the real house. She turned her back on the reception desk and the silence, observing veterans, marching toward the bank of elevators at the far end of the lobby. The guest rooms are on the second floor. I assume, she threw the question over her shoulder. And the master suite, the one with the balcony I saw from the driveway that must be on the third floor. I will take that one. I need the elevation for my sinuses. I did not move to stop her physically. I simply stood my ground and spoke clearly. System. Lockdown Sector 1 elevators. Authorization code. Hartwell Alpha 9. The lights above the elevator doors shifted instantly from a welcoming green to a harsh, forbidding red. A heavy metallic clunk echoed through the shaft as the magnetic brakes engaged. Sylvia pressed the up button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder. Then she began to jam her thumb against it repeatedly, her frustration mounting. It is broken, she shouted, turning to glare at me. Alina, your elevator is broken. Call the maintenance man. It is not broken, I said, walking slowly toward her, my heels clicking on the epoxy floor. It is locked. Because you are not going upstairs. Do not be ridiculous, Sylvia snapped. I am not sleeping in the lobby. You are under the impression that there is a penthouse waiting for you upstairs, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Let me correct that assumption. The second floor is the cryogenic storage and the server farm for the neural network. The temperature is kept at a steady 50 degrees Fahrenheit to protect the processors. The third floor, your master suite level, is the surgical wing and the post-operative recovery units. It is a sterile zone. The air pressure is negative to prevent contamination. Unless you are scrubbing in for a neurografting procedure, you are not stepping foot on that floor. Sylvia stared at me, her mouth slightly open. But the view, the balcony. The balcony is a ventilation intake for the HVAC system, I explained dryly. It is not for drinking tea. It is for cycling oxygen. Sylvia looked at Ethan, who was standing by the luggage, looking like a lost child. "Ethan, tell her to stop lying. We saw the pictures of the exterior. It is a mansion." I turned my gaze to my husband. He shrank under my scrutiny, pulling his collar up as if to hide. "Ethan," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "Why does your mother think this is a vacation home? I never told you I was buying a house. I told you I was leaving." Ethan swallowed hard. He looked at his mother, then at me, trapped between two formidable forces. "I might have seen the transaction alert," he mumbled, looking at his expensive Italian shoes. "Speak up," I commanded. "I saw the alert from the joint account," Ethan blurted out, his face flushing red. "Well, not the joint account, but the notification linked to your primary holdings. I saw a wire transfer for $12 million to a Swiss real estate firm. I looked up the property deed. It said, The Summit. I Googled the old photos of the place before the renovation. It looked like a castle. I assumed." "You assumed," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "You saw a number, and your greed filled in the rest of the blanks." "I thought you were surprising us," Ethan protested, his voice whining. "I thought you were finally spending some money on us instead of hoarding it all in your company. I told Mom you bought a villa. I told her we were set for life." Sylvia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "And he was right to assume that $12 million. Alina, you spent $12 million on this laboratory. That is family money. That is money that should have gone to Ethan's business ventures, or my retirement, not to a bunch of machines." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of any humor. "Let us be very clear about the economics of this situation. Sylvia," I said, stepping into her personal space, "I did not buy this place. Alina Hartwell, the individual, does not own the Summit. Aura Bio International owns this facility. It was purchased with corporate capital, allocated by the board of directors, for the specific purpose of nonprofit research and development." I watched the realization hit Sylvia. Her eyes widened. "That means," I continued, enjoying the look of horror spreading across her face, "that this is not a marital asset. If Ethan tries to divorce me, he gets 0% of this building. If you try to sue me, you get nothing. This is a corporate asset. It is a tax write-off. And strictly speaking, by having you here, I am violating about 20 different corporate liability clauses. You are not guests. You are unauthorized civilians in a high-security research zone." Sylvia staggered back as if I had slapped her. The dream of the Winter Palace was dissolving before her eyes. There was no inheritance to claim here. There was no luxury to leech off of. There was only science, and science did not care about her social status. You evil little snake," Sylvia hissed, her hands shaking. "You did this on purpose. You structured it this way so we could not touch it." "I structured it this way because I am a businesswoman, and you are a liability," I replied calmly. Sylvia let out a scream of frustration. She spun around, looking for something to lash out at. Her eyes landed on the group of patients standing near the entrance of the rehabilitation wing. Major Vance was still there, leaning against the wall, his carbon fiber arm crossed over his chest, his single good eye watching the scene with stoic indifference. Beside him, Sarah was adjusting the fit of her prosthetic leg. Sylvia pointed a trembling finger at them. "If we have to stay here," Sylvia announced, her voice shrill and trembling with rage, "then I want them gone. Get them out of here." "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice turning to ice. "The cripples," Sylvia shouted, using the slur with casual cruelty. "Look at them. They are depressing. I cannot live in a house with people who are missing pieces. It is morbid. It is bad energy. If you want me to stay here and forgive you for this deception, you need to clear them out. Send them to a regular hospital where they belong. I do not want to see metal arms and fake legs when I'm trying to eat my breakfast." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the servers seemed to quiet down. Ethan looked horrified, putting a hand on Sylvia's arm. Mom, you cannot say that. I can say whatever I want. Sylvia shook him off. I am Sterling. We do not cohabitate with experiments. She glared at Major Vance. The big man did not flinch. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Especially that one, Sylvia sneered, pointing directly at Vance. The one with the patch and the scars. He looks like a monster. He is scary. How am I supposed to sleep at night knowing Frankenstein is walking the halls? Something inside me snapped. It was a cold, calculated snap, like a steel cable parting under tension. I had tolerated her insults toward me for 5 years. I had tolerated her greed. I had tolerated her disrespect. But I would not tolerate her disrespecting the people under my protection. I walked past Sylvia, ignoring her completely, and went to stand beside Major Vance. I placed a hand on his metal shoulder. The synthetic muscle hummed under my palm. Sylvia, I said, my voice projecting across the room, authoritative and sharp. The man you just called a monster is Major Marcus Vance. He served 4 tours in global conflict zones. He lost his arm and his leg pulling 3 of his squad mates out of a burning transport vehicle. He held a perimeter alone for 6 hours while bleeding out so that his team could be evacuated. I looked at Sarah. Captain Sarah Jenkins, I continued. She was a test pilot for an experimental rescue craft. She flew into a hurricane to drop supplies to a stranded community when no one else would fly. She lost her legs when her stabilizer failed, but she still managed to land the craft away from a populated area to save civilians. I turned back to Sylvia, my eyes blazing. These people are not experiments. They are not depressing. They are the reason you get to sleep safely in your bed at night. They have sacrificed more of themselves literally, physically for the concept of duty and honor than you have ever contributed to anything in your entire 60 years of existence. Sylvia scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, save me the patriotic speech. They are damaged goods. Alina, and this is my house now. This is not your house, I cut her off, my voice sharp as a scalpel. And they are not damaged goods. They are the future. The technology inside Major Vance's arm alone is worth more than your entire life's earnings. He is a marvel of engineering and human resilience. I took a step toward her, forcing her to step back. You call him scary. Let me tell you what is scary. Sylvia. Scary is a woman who has never worked a day in her life, who lives off the charity of a daughter-in-law she despises, and who has the audacity to stand in a place of healing and demand to be treated like royalty. You are not royalty here. You are irrelevant. How dare you? Sylvia shrieked. Ethan, are you going to let her talk to me like this? She is choosing these freaks over your own mother? Ethan looked at me, then at Vance, who was staring him down with intense gravity. Ethan looked terrified. He knew, deep down, that he was out of his depth. Alina, Ethan pleaded, his voice weak. Can we just go upstairs? Mom is tired. She doesn't mean it. She's just stressed from the trip. She meant every word, I said. And she is not going upstairs. I told you. The upstairs is a sterile zone. Germs are not allowed. I looked Sylvia up and down, my gaze lingering on her muddy boots and her furious, red face. And right now, I concluded, you are the most dangerous contaminant in the building, Sylvia gasped, clutching her pearls. Are you kicking us out? Into the snow? It is dark. We will freeze. I am not kicking you out yet, I said, checking my watch. Because unlike you, I have a conscience. But you are not staying in the medical wing, and you are certainly not getting a master suite. I turned to the head of security, a stoic man standing near the door. Take their luggage to the auxiliary quarters, I ordered. The auxiliary quarters? Sylvia perked up slightly, hearing the fancy-sounding name. Is that the guest house? Does it have a jacuzzi? I smiled. It was a thin, razor-sharp smile. You will see, I said. It is very private. I did not tell her that the auxiliary quarters was the polite name for the converted storage shed behind the generator room, used for temporary overflow storage of bio-waste containers, before I had it retrofitted with a couple of bunk beds for emergency staff naps. Follow me, I said. And do not touch the walls. I do not want your fingerprints on my glass. The silence in the lobby was absolute, broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the air filtration system. I stood with my arms crossed, looking at the two people who had made my life a misery for the better part of a decade. They looked like displaced aristocracy, shivering in their expensive coats, surrounded by luggage that was worth more than the annual income of most families. I am going to make this very simple for you, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the sterile white floor. You are leaving, now. I checked the sleek titanium watch on my wrist. It is 1900 hours. The sun has set, but the road is plowed. If you leave now, you can make it to the village of Zermatt by 2100 hours. There are plenty of hotels there that cater to tourists. I am sure they will have the amenities you require. Sylvia stared at me, her eyes bulging. The reality that I was actually kicking her out was finally sinking in. She looked at the dark glass of the front doors, beyond which the snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets. You cannot be serious, Sylvia gasped. Alina, it is a blizzard out there. You would send your own mother-in-law out into a storm. I am 62 years old. I have a delicate constitution. You seemed healthy enough to scream at my patients 5 minutes ago, I replied, unmoved. And the storm is merely a light flurry. The SUV has four-wheel drive. You will be fine. I turned to the head of security, a man named Stone who stood by the door like a granite statue. Mr. Stone, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Sterling to their vehicle and assist them with their luggage. Yes, ma'am, Stone said, stepping forward. That was when Sylvia played her ace. It was a move I had seen her perform at least a dozen times, usually at restaurants when the bill arrived, or at family gatherings when the conversation shifted away from her. She let out a strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her forehead, clutching her temple dramatically. She swayed on her feet, doing a little pirouette of distress before collapsing. However, she was careful to collapse, not onto the hard epoxy floor, but directly into Ethan's arms. My head, Sylvia wailed, her voice trembling with theatrical agony. Oh, my heart. It is pounding, I can't breathe. The altitude and the stress makes me think I am having an episode. Ethan panicked immediately. He caught her, struggling under the weight of her fur coat. Mom, Alina, help her, she is fainting. I did not move. I did not rush to her side. I did not call for a medic. I simply watched the performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat navigating a maze. She is not fainting. Ethan, I said calmly. If she were fainting, her knees would have buckled first, and she would have hit the floor without protecting her head. She is staging a scene. How can you be so cruel? Ethan shouted, lowering Sylvia gently to the floor, or rather, to the pile of coats he frantically spread out for her. She is pale. She is gasping for air. She has high blood pressure. Alina, you know that... Sylvia lay on the floor, her eyes fluttering closed, emitting low, pitiful moans. Everything is spinning. I need a bed. I cannot travel. I sighed and walked over to the reception desk. I picked up a portable diagnostic scanner, a device we use to triage trauma patients. Okay, I said, walking over to where Sylvia lay. If it is a medical emergency, we treat it as such. I knelt beside her. Sylvia, can you hear me? She moaned louder, refusing to open her eyes. I am going to attach a cardiac monitor, I announced, holding up the device which beeped with a sharp, clinical tone. If your blood pressure is truly at a critical level, the protocol is immediate injection of beta blockers and an emergency airlift to the hospital in Geneva. The helicopter ride will cost $20,000, not covered by insurance, or if the monitor shows normal vitals. I will know you are lying. One of Sylvia's eyes cracked open. Just a slit. She saw the device in my hand, blinking with red lights. I think the dizziness is passing, she whispered weakly, clutching Ethan's hand. I just need rest. I cannot go back down that mountain tonight. It will kill me. I stood up, putting the scanner away. You are fine. Sylvia, your color is good. Your breathing is regular. Get up. We can't leave. Alina, Ethan suddenly blurted out, his voice cracking with desperation. He looked up at me from the floor, his eyes wet with tears. Why not? I asked. The car works. The road is open. Because we have nowhere to go, Ethan whispered. The admission hung in the cold air of the lobby. Excuse me? I asked. Ethan swallowed hard. We checked out of the hotel in New York 3 days ago. We brought everything. We don't have a reservation in Zermatt. So make one, I said. Use your phone. I can't, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a hum of humiliation. My card was declined at the gas station in the valley. I had to use the last of my cash to pay for the fuel to get up the driveway. I raised an eyebrow. Declined. The platinum card, Ethan said. The one linked to the corporate expense account. It stopped working. Ah, I said, nodding slowly. Yes, I froze all secondary cards associated with Aura Bio and my personal trust 3 days ago. I assumed you would not need them, since you have your own job and your own income. Ethan looked down. We both knew the truth. Ethan's job was a consulting title I had given him at a subsidiary company, a role that paid him a salary for doing absolutely nothing, and since I had frozen the assets, he was effectively destitute. We have no money, Alina, Ethan pleaded. We have no hotel. We have no gas to get back to the city. If you kick us out now, we will be sleeping in the car. Please, I know we messed up. I know Mom is difficult, but you cannot let your family freeze to death in a parking lot. I looked at them. Sylvia, the woman who had tormented me, lying on the floor in a fur coat she couldn't afford. Ethan, the man who had promised to cherish me, begging for a handout because he was too incompetent to manage his own life. I could send them away. I had every right. But if I did, they would become martyrs. They would find a way to spin this, and worse, they would be out of my sight. Keep your friends close, and your enemies where you can control their caloric intake. That was the new motto. Get up, I said to Sylvia. She blinked. Sensing a shift in the negotiation, she sat up, miraculously cured of her fainting spell. I will allow you to stay, I said. Ethan let out a breath of relief. Oh, thank God. Thank you. Alina, I knew you still cared. Do not interrupt me, I snapped. I am not finished. I walked back to the center of the lobby, assuming a command posture. I will allow you to stay for exactly 72 hours, 3 days. That is enough time for me to have my legal team draw up the separation papers and for you to arrange for a wire transfer from whatever personal savings you have left to buy plane tickets home. 3 days is reasonable, Sylvia said, standing up and brushing herself off. We can make do with that. Now, about that suite. There is no suit, I cut her off. You are not guests. You are refugees. And this facility has a strict policy regarding resource consumption. No one eats for free. No one sleeps for free. I pointed a finger at the heavy steel door located behind the reception desk, the one that led to the utility courtyard. You will be staying in the auxiliary quarters. Is that the guest house? Sylvia asked, hopeful. It is a converted storage unit, I clarified. It was originally designed to house biohazardous waste containers before transport. We scrubbed it down and put in 2 bunk beds for the night shift security team. It has heat, it has a toilet, and it has a lock. That is all. Sylvia's jaw dropped. You expect me to sleep in a trash shed? It is cleaner than your soul, Sylvia, I said. Take it or leave it. The snow is getting heavier. Sylvia looked at the window. The wind was howling now. She looked at Ethan. He shrugged helplessly. Fine, she hissed. 3 days. And, I continued, raising a finger, you will work. Work. Sylvia laughed nervously. I am retired. Not here, I said. Aura Bio is a functioning workplace. If you want to eat the food from our cafeteria, you will earn it. I am not spending the corporate budget on feeding you. I looked at my tablet, pulling up the facility's duty roster. Sylvia, you have always bragged about your culinary skills. You have told everyone who would listen that my cooking is poison and that you are a master chef. Sylvia puffed up her chest slightly. Well, it is true. I am a gourmet. Excellent, I said. Then you are assigned to the scullery. You will report to Chef Marco in the kitchen at 0600 hours tomorrow. You will not be cooking, because I do not trust you with the ingredients. You will be prepping, peeling potatoes, washing vegetables, scrubbing the pots, and if I hear one complaint from the kitchen staff, you do not eat. Sylvia looked like she was about to choke. I am Sterling, I do not peel potatoes. You do if you want breakfast, I said. I turned to Ethan. Ethan, you were captain of the football team in high school. Were you not? You are fit. You have energy, I guess, Ethan said warily. Good. The exterior maintenance crew is short-handed. Your job is snow removal. You will clear the walkways, the helipad, and the solar array panels, and you will be responsible for sanitizing the gym equipment in the rehabilitation wing after the patients finish their therapy sessions. That means wiping down the sweat. Alina, come on, Ethan groaned. I am a businessman. I don't shovel snow. You are currently an unemployed trespasser with $0 to your name, I reminded him. Manual labor will build character. Maybe you will finally grow a spine. I stepped closer to them, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And this is the most important rule. Listen closely. I pointed toward the hallway where Major Vance and the other patients had disappeared. These people, my patients, are the heart of this facility. They are heroes. You are guests on probation. If you look at them with disgust, if you make one snide comment, if you roll your eyes, or if you call them anything other than sir or ma'am, the deal is void. I leaned in, staring directly into Sylvia's eyes. I do not care if it is a blizzard. I do not care if it is -20 degrees. If you disrespect a veteran in my house, I will have security drag you out the front door and throw you into a snowbank. Do you understand me? Sylvia swallowed. She saw something in my eyes that she had never seen before. She saw that I was not bluffing. She saw that the timid girl she had bullied for years was dead, and in her place was a woman who held the power of life and death in her hands. I understand, Sylvia said through gritted teeth. Good, I said, straightening up. Mr. Stone, take them to the shed. Give them the standard issue wool blankets. No heated blankets. We are conserving energy. I watched as Stone led them away. Sylvia walked stiffly, clutching her fur coat, her head held high, but her eyes darting around with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. Ethan dragged the luggage behind him, the wheels clattering loudly on the floor, as the heavy steel door to the utility courtyard slammed shut behind them. I let out a long breath. I knew Sylvia. She had agreed, but she had not submitted. Even now, as she marched toward a converted trash shed, her mind was working. She was calculating. She was planning. She would play the victim. She would try to charm the staff. She would try to sabotage the operation to prove that I was incompetent. She would try to stage a coup. Let her try. She thought she was a wolf entering a sheep pen. She had no idea she had just locked herself in a cage with a tiger. I tapped my earpiece. Security, authorize full surveillance on the auxiliary quarters. I want audio and video. If she sneezes, I want to know about it. Copy that, Mrs. Hartwell. The voice crackled in my ear. I turned and walked back toward my lab. The distraction was handled. Now, I have work to do. And in the morning, the real show would begin. I looked forward to seeing how Sylvia Sterling handled a potato peeler. The first night in the auxiliary quarters was a lesson in humility that Sylvia Sterling failed to learn. I observed the footage the next morning from the safety of my command center. The infrared camera mounted in the corner of the converted storage shed showed a restless night. Sylvia had refused to sleep on the bottom bunk, claiming it was too close to the drafty floor, and had forced Ethan to lift her onto the top bunk. She spent the hours between midnight and 4 a.m. tossing and turning on the thin, military-grade foam mattress, muttering curses into the scratchy wool blanket I had provided. Breakfast was served at 0600 hours. It was not Eggs Benedict or smoked salmon. It was a standard nutrient-dense protein oatmeal that we served to the staff during emergency lockdowns, efficient, flavorless, and beige. "I am not eating this glue," Sylvia had declared, pushing the metal tray away. "Ethan, go find me a croissant." "There are no croissants, Mom," Ethan had replied, his voice heavy with fatigue as he shoveled the oatmeal into his mouth. "Alina said we work, or we do not eat. I suggest you eat the glue." Sylvia had starved rather than submit, or so she thought. According to the schedule, Sylvia was supposed to report to the scullery to begin her shift as a potato peeler. Ethan, to his credit, had trudged out into the snow with a shovel at dawn, looking like a broken man serving a sentence in a Siberian labor camp. But Sylvia was a different creature entirely. She was not a worker. She was a saboteur. I watched on the monitor as she left the shed. She walked toward the service entrance of the kitchen, but the moment she saw the delivery truck backing into the loading dock, distracting the staff, she veered left. She slipped through an unlocked side door that led to the administrative wing. I could have locked it remotely. I could have sounded the alarm and had Mr. Stone escort her back to the vegetable prep station, but I didn't. I wanted to see what she would do. I wanted to see just how deep she would dig her own grave. Sylvia moved through the corridors with a surprising stealth for a woman in heels. She avoided the main thoroughfares where the doctors and patients were active. She was hunting. She was looking for leverage. She found it in Conference Room B. It was a staging room we were using to prepare for the upcoming site inspection. On the long mahogany table lay a series of binders. They were labeled Project Phoenix Phase 2 Funding, Confidential. Sylvia slipped inside and closed the door. She approached the table like a shark circling a wounded seal. She flipped open the first binder. I switched the camera feed to the interior of the conference room and zoomed in. She ignored the technical specifications. She ignored the ethical compliance reports. Her eyes went straight to the guest list. Dr. Aris Thorne, Venture Capital, net worth $4 billion, Sylvia whispered, reading the text aloud to herself. Her finger traced down the page. Baroness Elara von Habsburg, philanthropist, net worth estimated $600 million, General Thomas Holloway, defense contractor. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. It was the smile of an addict who had just found a hidden stash. "Jackpot," she murmured, in Sylvia's warped mind. These were not scientists or serious investors coming to evaluate a medical breakthrough. These were rich people, and rich people were Sylvia's natural habitat. She believed that I, the socially awkward orphan scientist, would bore them to tears with my charts and graphs. She believed that what these billionaires really wanted was not neural interface technology, but a party. She believed she could save the day. And if she saved the day, she would be the hero. She would be the indispensable hostess who charmed the checkbooks right out of their pockets. And once she had secured the funding, she could convince Ethan and the board that I was merely the technician, while she was the face of the brand. I watched as she pulled out her phone. She sat at the head of the table, imagining herself the CEO. She began to dial. "Beatrice, darling." Sylvia's voice transformed instantly. Gone was the shrill, complaining tone she used with me. In its place was the honeyed, fake sophistication of a Manhattan socialite. "You will never guess where I am. I am in the Alps. Yes, the Swiss Alps. We just moved into the new villa. It is, oh, Beatrice, it is simply breathtaking. A winter palace." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Yes, well, Alina is here. Of course, she is busy with her little science experiments in the basement, but I am running the household. Listen, darling, we are having a grand opening gala this weekend. Very exclusive. Just a few billionaires and some European royalty. I want you to come. Yes, bring the girls, and bring that charming man you met in Monaco." I leaned back in my chair in the security hub, shaking my head. She was inviting her friends. These were the same women she owed money to the bridge club members she had borrowed from to pay off her credit cards. The social climbers who were starting to whisper that the sterling fortune was gone. She was inviting them to witness her triumph. She was setting the stage for a humiliation so public it would be legendary. Saturday night, Sylvia cooed into the phone. The dress code is Alpine glamour. See you there, darling. She hung up and immediately dialed another number. Then another. She invited 5 people. 5 vapid, gossip-hungry vultures who would descend on my research facility expecting caviar and champagne. Just then, the door to the conference room opened. Ethan walked in. He was covered in snow, his face red from the cold. Holding his shovel, he had likely seen her slip away and followed her. "Mom," Ethan asked, breathless, "what are you doing? You're supposed to be in the kitchen. If Alina catches you—" "Quiet, you fool," Sylvia hissed, covering the phone. "I am fixing your mess." "Fixing?" Ethan looked at the binders on the table. "Mom, those are confidential documents. You cannot touch those. That is corporate espionage." "It is a guest list." Ethan, Sylvia stood up, waving the binder in his face. "Do you know who is coming here on Saturday, Aris Thorne? The man is worth billions, and your wife plans to bore him to death with PowerPoint presentations." "Alina knows what she is doing," Ethan said weakly. "She built this company." "She got lucky," Sylvia snapped. "She is a lab rat. She has zero social grace. If she talks to these people, they will keep their checkbooks closed. But if I talk to them, if I throw a proper party, they will be so charmed they will double their investment. I am doing this for us. Ethan, once I secure this funding, I will demand a seat on the board, and then we will see who sleeps in the shed." Ethan looked terrified. "Mom, please, stop. You are going to get us arrested. Alina said 1 strike and we are out." "Alina is bluffing," Sylvia scoffed. "She needs us. She needs a family. She just doesn't know it yet. Now, get out of here before you drip melted snow on the mahogany. I have catering to arrange." Ethan stood there for a moment, his spine bending under the weight of his mother's dominance. He wanted to do the right thing. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but years of conditioning won out. He turned and walked out, closing the door, becoming an accomplice by his silence. Sylvia returned to her phone. She pulled up a website for a high-end luxury catering service in Geneva. "Hello," she said, adopting her imperious tone. "Yes, this is Alina Hartwell calling from the Aura Bio facility at the summit." My eyes narrowed. Identity theft. "I need to make an emergency order for this Saturday," Sylvia continued, lying effortlessly. "I know it is short notice, but money is no object. I need beluga caviar, 3 kilos, yes, and truffles, white Alba truffles. Also, send 20 cases of Dom Perignon, the vintage bottles, and I need a full service staff, waiters, bartenders, no, not the regular staff. I want models, handsome ones." She paused, tapping her manicured nails on the table. "Charge it to the corporate account, authorization code." She flipped through the binder until she found a purchase order form I had left in the back. Authorization code AB-7792-Phoenix, yes. Expedited delivery by helicopter. She hung up the phone with a satisfied smirk. She looked around the room, visualizing the party. She saw herself in a gown, holding court, the savior of the company, while I sulked in the corner, in the security hub. My finger hovered over the cancel order button on my console. The automated system had already flagged the purchase. A bright red warning box flashed on my screen. Unusual activity detected, high-value purchase, non-compliant with nutritional protocols, approve. It was nearly $100,000 worth of food and alcohol. It was a massive misuse of funds. It was a fraud. It was theft. If I stopped it now, Sylvia would just be angry. She would claim she was only trying to help. She would say I was ungrateful. But if I let the order go through, if I let the helicopter land, if I let her sign the receipt upon delivery, then she would have committed wire fraud and corporate embezzlement across international borders. She would have created a paper trail so thick and undeniable that no lawyer on earth could save her. And Saturday, the investors. Sylvia thought she was inviting socialites to a party. She didn't realize that Dr. Thorne and Baroness von Habsburg were not just rich. They were bioethicists and serious academics. They despised waste. They despised frivolity. If they walked into a serious medical review and found a drunken circus run by a woman wearing stolen valor, they would be insulted, but they would also see the contrast. I realized then that Sylvia was not destroying my event. She was creating the perfect control group. She was going to show the investors exactly the kind of chaotic, greedy world I was trying to heal the world from. I moved my finger away from the cancel button. I moved it to the approve button. "Let them eat cake," I whispered. I clicked the mouse. The screen flashed green. Order approved. Delivery scheduled for Saturday, 1600 hours. Sylvia stood up in the conference room, smoothing her skirt. She looked triumphant. She thought she had pulled off the heist of the century. She had no idea she had just signed her own confession. She slipped out of the conference room and headed back toward the kitchen, ready to fake a morning of hard work. I watched her go, feeling a cold, calm satisfaction. She wanted to play the hostess fine. I would give her the stage. I would give her the lights. I would even give her the audience. And then, when the curtain fell, I would give her the bill. Saturday arrived with the atmospheric pressure of a ticking bomb. The collision of two worlds began promptly at 4 p.m. On one side, we had the legitimate guests. General Thomas Holloway arrived first. Stepping out of a black government sedan with the rigid posture of a man who had spent 40 years in uniform, beside him was Dr. Aris Thorne, a venture capitalist with a Ph.D. in neurobiology, a man who famously never smiled and checked investment portfolios for fun. They were accompanied by a delegation of serious-minded bioethicists and military procurement officers. They wore gray suits, carried tablets loaded with data, and looked ready to discuss the intricacies of synaptic latency and nerve regeneration. On the other side, descending from the sky like a flock of confused flamingos, were Sylvia's friends, the helicopter Sylvia had chartered, likely charged to the same fraudulent account as the catering landed on the helipad. Kicking up a storm of snow that nearly blew General Holloway's hat off, out stepped the Alpine glamour squad. There was Beatrice, a woman who had married 4 oil tycoons and buried 3 of them. She was wearing a neon pink ski suit that looked radioactive against the white landscape. Behind her was Tinsley, a gossip columnist who hadn't written a truthful sentence since 1998, wrapped in a lynx coat that dragged on the wet ground. And finally, a man named Julian, a lifestyle consultant, who wore sunglasses despite the heavy cloud cover and carried a Pomeranian dog in a designer tote bag. I watched from the second-floor gallery, hidden behind the tinted glass of the server room. It was a train wreck in slow motion. The lobby, usually a sanctuary of silence and sterility, had been transformed. Sylvia had been busy. The unauthorized catering team, handsome male models in tight black t-shirts, were weaving through the room, carrying silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage Dom Perignon. The sleek stainless steel reception desk, usually reserved for patient intake, was now a bar. A DJ booth had been set up next to the decontamination showers, blasting a remix of upbeat lounge music that thumped against the acoustic paneling. And then, she appeared. Sylvia Sterling descended the spiral staircase. I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch. She was wearing my dress. It was an emerald green silk gown I had bought for a gala in Paris 5 years ago and left in storage in New York. She must have raided the boxes I had shipped over but hadn't unpacked yet. The dress was too tight for her, straining at the seams, but she wore it with an oblivious confidence that was almost admirable. She had adorned herself with a necklace of fake diamonds that glittered aggressively under the harsh laboratory lights. "Welcome, welcome to the summit," Sylvia shouted over the music. Throwing her arms wide as if she were greeting subjects, she practically sprinted toward General Holloway, ignoring his extended hand and going in for a double-cheek kiss. The general recoiled as if he had been attacked by a biological weapon. "So glad you could make it," Sylvia cooed, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and shoving it into Dr. Thorne's hand. "Drink up." It is good stuff. None of that cheap Prosecco. Doctor, Thorne looked at the glass as if it contained a urine sample. Madam, he said, his voice dry as dust, I am here to inspect the Class 4 cleanroom facilities. Alcohol is prohibited in the staging area. Oh, pish-tosh, Sylvia laughed, slapping him playfully on the shoulder. Loosen up. Aris? Can I call you Aris? We are all friends here. Look around. Have a canapé. The truffles were flown in this morning. Ethan was standing near the entrance, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He was wearing a tuxedo that Sylvia had likely forced him to rent, and he was currently being cornered by Tinsley, who was loudly asking him why the servants were wearing scrubs. Those are doctors. Tinsley, Ethan mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. Doctors, Tinsley screeched, her voice cutting through the bass of the music. How avant-garde. Is that the theme? Medical chic, I love it. It is so morbid. The situation deteriorated rapidly. I had given strict orders to my staff and patients. Do not engage. Let the circus perform. I wanted the investors to see this. I wanted them to see exactly what I was dealing with, but I hadn't anticipated the sheer level of offensiveness Sylvia's entourage would bring. Beatrice, the oil widow, wandered over to the rehabilitation wing. The glass partition was open, and Major Vance was inside, going through his afternoon calibration routine. He was walking on the treadmill, his carbon fiber leg visible as he tested the load-bearing sensors. Beatrice tapped on the glass with her long, acrylic nails. Click, click, click. Excuse me? She shouted at Major Vance. Hello there, mister, robot man. Vance ignored her, continuing his stride. Rude, Beatrice huffed, turning to Sylvia, who had just glided over. Sylvia, darling, really? The decor is stunning, very industrial, very minimalist, but do we have to look at the machinery? It is a bit grotesque. Can't you put a curtain up? It is ruining my appetite for the caviar. Sylvia nodded sympathetically, resting a hand on Beatrice's arm. I know, darling, it is an eyesore, but you know how it is. We are still in the transition phase. The previous owner, my daughter-in-law, had some very strange hobbies. She liked to collect broken things. General Halloway, who had been standing nearby examining a schematic, stiffened. He turned slowly, his face turning a shade of purple that usually preceded an explosion. Did you just refer to a decorated combat veteran as a broken thing? The general growled, his voice low and dangerous. Sylvia didn't even notice the threat. She was too busy signaling a waiter for more truffles. Oh, General, do not be so serious. I just mean that it is not very aesthetic, is it? We are trying to create an atmosphere of luxury here. White snow, blue skies, beautiful people, not metal limbs and scars. Doctor, Thorne stepped forward, placing his champagne glass on a table with a sharp clink. Mrs. Sterling, he said. This is a research facility. The metal limbs are the point. We are here to evaluate the efficacy of the Phoenix Project, not to attend a cocktail hour. Sylvia waved a dismissive hand. Oh, the Phoenix Project. Yes, boring science stuff. But listen, Aris, I have a much better vision for this place, and since you are the money men, I think you will appreciate a real business plan. She gestured to the DJ to cut the music. The sudden silence was jarring. The only sound was the hum of the servers and the panting of Julian's Pomeranian. Sylvia climbed up onto the raised platform of the reception desk. She smoothed her stolen green dress and cleared her throat, grabbing a wireless microphone from the DJ stand. Attention, everyone, she announced, her voice booming through the atrium. If I could have a moment of your time. She beamed at the crowd. The investors looked confused and angry. Her friends looked bored. The medical staff looked ready to commit murder. I know you all came here expecting to see charts and graphs, Sylvia began, flashing a smile that she thought was charming, but looked more like a rictus of desperation. But let us be honest, biotechnology is so messy, it is so cold, and frankly, it is not very profitable. I saw a doctor. Thorne's eyebrows shoot up into his hairline. Not profitable? he muttered. The market cap is $3 trillion, Sylvia continued, oblivious. My name is Sylvia Sterling. I am the honorary president of this facility. My daughter-in-law, Alina, is a sweet girl, but she is just a manager. She lacks vision. She thinks small. She thinks about helping people. I think about the experience. She paused for dramatic effect. I am announcing today that we are pivoting, Sylvia declared triumphantly. We are scrapping this gloomy hospital concept. Instead, under my leadership, the summit will be reborn as the world's most exclusive alpine rejuvenation spa. A murmur went through the room, not of excitement, but of sheer disbelief. Think about it, Sylvia shouted, gaining momentum. Why fix severed nerves when we can fix wrinkles? Why build robotic arms when we can offer gold leaf facials and cryotherapy for weight loss? We have the equipment. We have the location. We will turn these labs into massage suites. We will turn the rehabilitation gym into a yoga studio. And those depressing patient rooms, they will be guest suites for the elite. She pointed at General Holloway. General, imagine retiring here, not to watch soldiers learn to walk again, but to sip brandy by a fire while a Swedish masseuse works on your stress knots. That is the Sterling vision. That is what I'm offering you today. Who wants to invest in that? Beatrice clapped politely. I love it, Sylvia. I would totally buy a membership. General Holloway looked like he was about to have a stroke. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. You insane woman, he barked. You are proposing we take a facility designed to save the lives of heroes and turn it into a beauty parlor for narcissists. It is called pivoting to the luxury market. General, Sylvia snapped back, offended. It is where the real money is. And frankly, I have already started the transition. I have ordered the removal of that ugly equipment in the lobby for tomorrow morning. We are making room for a chocolate fountain. That was the line. I was standing in the control booth overlooking the atrium. My hand was resting on the master environmental control panel. Sylvia had not just embarrassed herself. She had desecrated the mission of the company. She had stood in front of the men and women who funded the future of medicine and told them she wanted to replace them with a chocolate fountain. It was time to end the party. I did not scream. I did not run down the stairs. I simply typed a command into the console, override code blackout. Instantly, the festive mood died. The overhead track lights, which Sylvia had set to a warm, flattering amber, slammed off. The atrium was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency strip lighting along the floor cold, harsh, clinical blue LEDs. The DJ's power cut out with a dying groan of the amplifier. The ventilation system kicked into high gear. I engaged the purge mode, a setting designed to clear airborne contaminants. Massive fans roared to life, cycling the air in the room every 30 seconds. The gentle warmth of the lobby was instantly replaced by a blast of filtered, chilly air that made Sylvia's friends shriek and pull their furs tighter. A spotlight from the central rig, one used for examining prototypes, snapped on. It did not hit Sylvia. It hit the balcony where I stood. I held a microphone in my hand. My voice did not boom like Sylvia's. It was amplified through the facility's emergency address system. It was crisp, metallic, and absolutely terrifying. The party is over, I said. Every head turned up to look at me. I stood in the harsh white light, looking down at them like a deity judging mortals. General Holloway, Dr. Thorne, I said, acknowledging them with a curt nod. I apologize for the unauthorized breach of protocol. The woman standing on my reception desk is suffering from a delusion of grandeur caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain and an excess of greed. Sylvia squinted up at the light, blinded. Alina, what are you doing? Turn the lights back on. You are ruining my pitch. Your pitch? I asked, my voice echoing off the steel walls. Sylvia, you do not have a pitch, you do not have company, and you certainly do not have a presidency. I began to walk down the stairs, the spotlight following me. You are a trespasser who has just admitted to conspiracy to commit corporate fraud in front of 5 witnesses, including a high-ranking military officer. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward the center of the room. The catering staff backed away. Sensing the shift in power, the male models looked terrified. "Alina, stop this!" Sylvia screeched, trying to salvage her dignity. "I am trying to help you. These people were bored. I gave them a vision." "You gave them a reason to pull funding," I corrected her. "Or you would have, if anyone here took you seriously." I turned to Dr. Thorne. "Dr. Thorne, is Aurabio pivoting to the spa industry?" "Absolutely not," Dr. Thorne said, his voice dripping with disdain. "If this woman had any authority, I would pull my capital immediately, but I assume she is irrelevant." "Completely," I confirmed. I turned to Sylvia. She was trembling now, realizing the room had turned against her. Beatrice and Tinsley were inching away, not wanting to be associated with the failure. "You said you are the honorary president," I asked, stepping closer to the desk where she stood. "Strange, I do not recall the board voting on that. I do, however, recall the board approving a budget for a security team." I looked at Stone, my head of security. "Mr. Stone," I said, "this is no longer a social gathering. It is a security breach. Remove the unauthorized civilians. All of them." "Wait," Sylvia cried, holding up her hands. "You cannot kick my friends out. They are guests." "They are contaminants," I said. "And Sylvia, that dress you are wearing." Sylvia looked down at the emerald silk. "It is a vintage Valentino," I said softly. "And you have spilled caviar on it. I will be adding the cost of dry cleaning to the debt you already owe me." "Ethan!" Sylvia screamed, looking for her son. "Do something. She is humiliating me." But Ethan was gone. He had slipped away into the shadows of the corridor, hiding in the bathroom, too cowardly to face the storm his mother had created. "General," I said, turning my back on Sylvia as if she were nothing more than a noisy piece of equipment. "If you would follow me to the sterile conference room, I have the actual presentation ready. It concerns the Phase 3 neural grafting success rates, and I promise you, there will be no chocolate fountains." General Holloway cracked a rare, grim smile. "Lead the way, Dr. Hartwell. Let's get away from this circus." As I led the investors away, Stone and his team moved in. The Alpine Glamour Squad began to protest, but the sight of armed security guards was enough to silence even Beatrice. Sylvia was left standing alone on the reception desk in the dark. Cold lobby, clutching a dead microphone, looking like a queen whose kingdom had just evaporated into thin air. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, but it was not enough. I could see the lingering doubt in the eyes of the investors. They looked at Sylvia, standing on the desk in her stolen gown, and then they looked at me. The woman who had just cut the power. It was a chaotic scene. She said moment that threatened to turn my professional reputation into a tabloid drama. I realized that simply kicking her out was not sufficient. I had to excoriate the rot. I had to perform a surgical removal of the cancer that had plagued my life for years, and I had to do it with the precision of the lasers I used in my lab. "Wait," I said, my voice stopping General Holloway and Dr. Thorne just as they were turning toward the corridor. "Before we discuss the future of the Phoenix Project, we need to address the past. You have been subjected to a farce today. You deserve to see the unfiltered reality." I did not scream. I did not point fingers. I simply turned to the massive 20-foot screen behind the reception desk, the one Sylvia had wanted to replace with a chocolate fountain. "System," I commanded, my voice clear and steady. "Execute protocol truth. Display security logs from the last 24 hours, audio and visual, maximum volume." The screen, which had been black, roared to life. The resolution was crystal clear, 4 times sharper than standard high definition. The first image to appear was not of a medical breakthrough, but of a theft. It was footage from yesterday afternoon. It showed Sylvia, clear as day, prying open a sealed storage crate marked "Personal Effects, Do Not Touch." The timestamp in the corner ticked by as the audience watched Sylvia rip through the packaging, pull out the emerald green Valentino gown she was currently wearing, and hold it up against her body. "Ugh," Sylvia on the screen said. Her voice amplified through the atrium speakers. "Alina has such tasteless fashion. But this will do. I will just tell people it is vintage." A gasp went through the room. Sylvia, standing on the desk, went pale. She looked down at the dress, then up at the screen, her mouth opening and closing in silent denial. But the video cut to the next clip before she could speak. Now the screen showed the conference room from this morning. It showed Sylvia sitting at the head of the table with the confidential investor binders open. It showed her forging my signature on the catering order. "I am the CEO now," the on-screen Sylvia muttered with a wicked grin as she signed my name. "Stupid girl. She does the work. I spend the money." Beatrice and Tinsley, standing in the crowd, exchanged horrified looks. The evidence of fraud was undeniable, but I was not done. I needed to destroy her credibility with the specific people she had tried to charm. "And finally," I said, looking directly at Dr. Thorne, "the marketing strategy." The video shifted. It was Sylvia on the phone with Tinsley earlier that day. "Oh, the guest list is a nightmare," the recorded Sylvia complained, her voice dripping with venom. "It is just a bunch of boring nerds and government stiffnecks, Dr. Thorne. Please, the man looks like a tortoise in a suit. I bet he hasn't smiled since 1980. And that general, he is just a wallet with legs. I will flash a little smile, give them some cheap champagne, and they will sign whatever check I put in front of them. They are so desperate to feel important." The audio cut off. The silence that returned to the lobby was terrifying. Dr. Aris Thorne slowly turned his head. He looked at Sylvia. His expression was no longer one of annoyance. It was one of cold, absolute fury. He was a man who controlled billions of dollars of capital, a man who was respected globally for his intellect, and he had just heard himself described as a tortoise and a mark by a woman standing on a desk in a stolen dress. General Holloway stepped forward. He did not look like a wallet with legs. He looked like a man who had commanded tank divisions. "Mrs. Sterling," the general said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "I have sat across the table from warlords and dictators. I have never been insulted with such casual incompetence as I have been today." Sylvia began to tremble. Her bravado crumbled like wet paper. "It is a deep fake," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Alina made it up. It is you know how good computers are these days. I never said that. The security system is hardwired and encrypted," I interjected calmly. "It cannot be altered, and we all know that is exactly how you speak." I walked to the center of the room, standing between the investors and Sylvia. I looked up at her, pitiful and small despite her elevation. "Sylvia Sterling does not hold a position at Aura Bio," I announced, addressing the entire room. "She is not the honorary president. She is not a shareholder. She is an unauthorized civilian who broke into a secure facility. She is a trespasser, and based on the footage you just saw of her signing my name to a $100,000 catering order, she is also a criminal." I turned back to the investors. I softened my expression, letting the mask of the CEO slip just enough to reveal the human being underneath. "I apologize for this spectacle," I said. "But in a way, I am glad it happened." I gestured to the back of the room, where Major Vance and Captain Jenkins were standing by the rehabilitation wing doors. They had been watching quietly, dignified, and silent amidst the chaos. "You asked me earlier, Dr. Thorne, why I insist on building this facility here. In the isolation of the Alps, instead of in a major city, you asked why we need such extreme privacy." I pointed at Sylvia, then at her group of shallow, judgmental friends. "This is why," I said. "Because the world is full of people like Sylvia Sterling, people who look at a hero with a prosthetic limb and see something ugly, people who look at trauma and see an eyesore that ruins their aesthetic, people who think that rejuvenation means a spa day for the wealthy, not the reconstruction of a shattered life. I took a step closer to the general. Sylvia called my patients broken things. But look at her. Look at the greed, the vanity, the deceit. She is the one who is broken. My patients. They are whole in ways she will never understand. I built this place to protect them from her, to protect them from the judgment of a society that wants to erase the reality of sacrifice because it is uncomfortable to look at. I took a deep breath, my voice ringing with conviction. I am not pivoting to a spa. I am doubling down on science, because if we do not fight for these people, if we let the Sylvias of the world win, then we have lost our humanity. That is my pitch. That is the only pitch I have. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, General Holloway began to clap. It was a slow, heavy applause. Clap, clap, clap. Doctor. Thorne joined him, then the bioethicists, then the staff. Even the catering models put down their trays and started applauding. It was not polite applause. It was a thunderous endorsement. It was the sound of respect. Sylvia stood on the desk, frozen. She looked around, expecting someone to come to her defense, but the tide had turned completely, and then the second wave of the tsunami hit her. Her friends, Beatrice, the woman in the pink ski suit, stepped forward. She was not clapping. She was looking at Sylvia with narrow, dangerous eyes. The revelation that the villa was not Sylvia's property, and that Sylvia was effectively broke, had triggered a different kind of realization. "Wait a minute," Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the applause. "If you do not own this place, and if you are broke, then what happened to the $50,000 I wired you last week?" The room went quiet again. Sylvia's eyes widened. "Beatrice, darling, that was an investment in the holding company." "You told me it was a buy-in for a share of the property title," Beatrice shouted, advancing on the desk. "You told me I would be a co-owner of the Sterling Winter Palace. You said the deed was in transit." "And my 20,000, Tinsley chimed in, stepping up beside Beatrice. "You said you needed liquid cash to clear the customs fee on the furniture. There is no furniture. It is a hospital." The Alpine glamour squad dissolved instantly into a mob of angry creditors. They weren't friends. They were co-conspirators in a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And now that the illusion was shattered, they wanted their blood money back. "You are a fraud. Sylvia," Beatrice yelled, shaking her fist. "You are nothing but a common con artist. Give me my money back right now, or I will call my lawyer and have you thrown in a Swiss prison so fast your head will spin." I can explain," Sylvia stammered, backing away until her heels hit the edge of the desk. She looked frantically around the room. Ethan, tell them it is a misunderstanding." I turned to look for my husband. Ethan was standing in the shadow of a pillar near the entrance to the restrooms. He had heard everything. He had seen his mother expose herself as a thief and a liar. He had heard the investors applaud his wife. He had seen the creditors turn on his mother. This was his moment. A man with a spine would have stepped forward. He might have defended his mother, or he might have finally sided with his wife, but Ethan did neither. He stood there, frozen, his face a mask of abject terror. He looked at Sylvia, then he looked at me, and then he looked at his shoes. He shrank back further into the shadows, making himself as small as possible. He was abandoning her. He was abandoning everyone. He was a vacuum of a man. Devoid of substance, I felt a final, severe snap in my chest. The last thread of obligation I felt toward him disintegrated. "Ethan has nothing to say," I said coldly. "Because Ethan has no voice here." I turned to Mr. Stone, who was waiting for my signal. He looked eager. He had been polite for too long. "Mr. Stone," I said, "the show is over. Clear the floor." "With pleasure, ma'am," Stone grunted. He signaled to his team. 4 large men, all former military police, stepped out of the shadows. They did not move with the gentle guidance of ushers. They moved with the efficiency of bouncers clearing a bar fight. "You cannot touch me," Beatrice shrieked as a guard took her by the elbow. "I am an American citizen. I know people." You can tell them all about it at the bottom of the mountain, the guard said. Marching her toward the door, Tinsley and Julian gathered their furs in the Pomeranian, scurrying after Beatrice like rats fleeing a sinking ship, still shouting demands for their money as they were herded out into the cold. That left Sylvia. She was still standing on the reception desk, isolated, humiliated, and exposed. Stone approached the desk. He didn't offer her a hand. He simply pointed to the floor. "Get down," Stone ordered, "or I will help you down." Sylvia scrambled down, her green dress catching on the edge of the desk and ripping audibly. Reep. She didn't even care. She landed on the floor in a heap of emerald silk and shame. "Alina," she whispered, looking up at me. Her eyes were wet, but I knew they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. "Alina, you cannot do this. I am family." I looked down at her. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of her expectations, her insults, her financial abuse, it was all gone. "No, Sylvia," I said, my voice quiet but echoing in the silence of the room. "You are not family. You are a lesson I have finally learned." I gestured to the door. "Get out." Sylvia looked at Ethan one last time, but he turned his back on her, with a sob that was half wail, half growl. She gathered the shreds of her dignity and stumbled toward the exit. Following her angry creditors out into the snow, the heavy doors slammed shut behind them. The silence that followed was not empty. It was peaceful. It was clean. I turned back to General Halloway and Dr. Thorne. I smoothed my lab coat. "Now," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in days. "Shall we go look at those neural graphs? I believe I have some data that will make you very happy." The heavy steel doors had barely clicked shut when a shrill, piercing scream erupted from the other side, muffled only slightly by the inches of reinforced metal and soundproofing. It was not a scream of fear, but of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Sylvia Sterling was not going into the night without burning the world down first. "Open this door!" Sylvia shrieked, her fists pounding against the steel. "I am not leaving. You cannot do this to me. I have rights. I am the mother of your husband. I am Sterling." I signaled to Stone. "Let her back in. Just her and Ethan." Stone looked at me with concern. "Ma'am, she is volatile." "I know," I said, reaching into the inner pocket of my lab coat and withdrawing a slim, sealed blue envelope. "But we have one final piece of business to conclude. If I send her away now, she will spend the next 10 years suing me from a distance. I prefer to end the war tonight." Stone nodded and punched the release code. The door slid open. Sylvia stumbled back into the lobby, her hair wild, her torn green dress trailing behind her like the flag of a defeated nation. She looked deranged, her makeup smeared by snow and tears of rage. Ethan followed her, looking like a ghost haunting his own life. "You think you can humiliate me?" Sylvia hissed, marching toward me. "You think you can just throw me out like trash? I know my rights. Alina, Ethan is your husband. That means half of everything you own belongs to him, and by extension, I will make sure he gives it to me." She spun around to face Ethan, grabbing him by the lapels of his rented tuxedo. "Ethan, call a lawyer," she commanded. "Right now, we are suing her for emotional distress, for unsafe living conditions, and for kidnapping. We will take half this company. We will take this villa and turn it into the spa. I will not rest until she is destitute." I stood perfectly still, watching her unravel. It was fascinating how she clung to the delusion of power even when she was standing in the wreckage of her own making. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Sylvia breathed heavily, her chest heaving. "No, I am just getting started. You think you are so smart with your science and your robots, but you forgot about the law. Little girl, California is a community property state. You married Ethan there. That means 50% of your precious aura bio belongs to him. And since I control him, it belongs to me." I couldn't help it. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, Sylvia," I said, shaking my head. You really should have paid more attention to the financial pages and less to the society columns. I held up the blue envelope. Ethan, I said, looking at my husband, do you want to tell her, or should I? Ethan looked at the envelope. He recognized it. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He slumped against the wall, covering his face with his hands. Tell me what, Sylvia demanded, looking between us. What is he hiding? Ethan does not own half of Orabio, I said, stepping forward. Ethan does not own anything. In fact, strictly speaking, Ethan does not even own the suit he is wearing. Lies, Sylvia spat. He is Sterling. The Sterling Trust is worth millions. The Sterling Trust, I interrupted, my voice sharpening into a blade. Imploded 2 years ago. Do you remember the market correction you complained about? The one where you had to sell the yacht? You thought it was just a bad quarter. The truth is, the family business was leveraged to the hilt. You were bankrupt. Sylvia, completely, irrevocably insolvent. Sylvia froze. No, that is impossible. Ethan told me he fixed it. He said he found an angel investor. He did, I said. Me. I walked over to the reception desk, the same desk Sylvia had stood on minutes ago, and placed the envelope down. I opened it and pulled out a stack of documents. 2 years ago, when the creditors were about to seize your penthouse in Manhattan, your summer home in the Hamptons, and even your car, Ethan came to me begging. He didn't want you to know you were broke. He wanted to protect your fragile ego. He wanted to maintain the illusion of the Sterling dynasty. I picked up a document titled Deed of Trust Transfer. So, I made a business decision. I created a shell company called Nebula Holdings, and through that company, I bought every single cent of the Sterling family debt. I paid off the bank. I paid off the private lenders. I even paid off the credit card companies. Sylvia blinked, trying to process the information. Did you pay it off? So we are free? No, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. You are not free. You just changed masters. I tapped the document with my index finger. You do not owe the bank anymore. Sylvia, you owe Nebula Holdings. And since I am the sole proprietor of Nebula Holdings, you owe me. I watched the realization hit her. It was physical. Her knees buckled slightly. You owe me $4 million in principal. I recited from memory. Plus 2 years of accrued interest at 6%. The penthouse you live in, I hold the mortgage. The Hamptons house, I hold the deed. The car you drove here, it is leased from my company. You, Sylvia gasped, clutching her chest. You own us. I own everything. I confirmed. I let you live in those houses because I loved Ethan, and he asked me to preserve your dignity. I let you pretend to be rich because it kept the peace, but the peace is over. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a second document. This one was stapled and marked with a bright yellow sticky note. And this, I said, sliding it across the desk toward Ethan, is the divorce settlement. Ethan looked up, tears streaming down his face. Alina, please. It is a standard no-fault divorce, I continued, ignoring his tears. But there is a clause regarding asset division. Since the debt you owe me exceeds the value of your share of our marital assets by a factor of 3, you leave with nothing. The debt is forgiven in exchange for a complete forfeiture of all claims. Sylvia stared at the papers. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out. Her survival instinct was kicking in. We will not sign, Sylvia declared, her voice trembling but defiant. We will fight this. You cannot just take our homes. I have squatters' rights. I have influence. You have nothing, I said. But if you want to fight, be my guest. However, before you call your lawyer, you might want to deal with the other problem. What other problem? Sylvia asked warily. The felony you committed yesterday. I said. I nodded to Stone. He pressed a button on the wall console. The main entrance doors slid open again. But this time, it was not the wind that entered. 2 officers in dark blue uniforms walked in. They wore the insignia of the Swiss cantonal police. They were polite, professional, and armed. Sylvia let out a strangled yelp and scrambled back behind Ethan. "Police! Why are there police?" "Officer Weber," I said, nodding to the lead policeman. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Dr. Hartwell," the officer replied, tipping his cap. He turned his gaze to Sylvia. "Is this the individual?" "Yes," I said. I turned back to Sylvia, who looked like she was about to vomit. "Remember that catering order?" "Sylvia," I asked pleasantly. "The one for the caviar and the champagne. The one where you forged my signature and used my corporate authorization code." "I was just," Sylvia stammered. "It was a misunderstanding. I am her mother-in-law. I have implied consent." "You do not have implied consent to commit wire fraud," I corrected her. "That order was for $100,000. You crossed international borders to do it. You impersonated a corporate officer to embezzle funds from a biotechnology firm in Switzerland. They take banking fraud very seriously. It is not a civil matter. Sylvia, it is a criminal one." Officer Weber stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "Mrs. Sylvia Sterling," the officer said, his English heavily accented, but perfectly understandable. "We have received a formal complaint regarding identity theft, fraud, and unauthorized use of corporate financial instruments. You are under arrest." Sylvia shrieked. It was a primal sound. She grabbed Ethan and tried to use him as a human shield. "Ethan, do something. They are going to put me in jail. Tell them I didn't mean it." Ethan stood there, limp as a rag doll. He looked at the police, then at me. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of reality crashing down on him. "Wait," I shouted. The officer paused, looking at me. "I have a proposition," I said. I walked over to Sylvia, who was cowering against the reception desk, trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. "Sylvia," I said softly, "I do not want to send you to a Swiss prison. I hear the cells are quite cold, and the food is very basic, certainly no white truffles." "Please," Sylvia begged, grabbing my hand with her cold, clammy fingers. "Please, Alina, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Don't let them take me." "I can drop the charges," I said. "I can tell Officer Weber that it was, in fact, a misunderstanding, a domestic dispute." Yes, do that," Sylvia cried. "But," I said, holding up a finger, "there is a price." I pulled the final document from my blue envelope. It was a single page. Simple, brutal. "This is a quitclaim deed and a liability release," I explained. "If you sign this, you acknowledge the debt you owe to Nebula Holdings. You agree to voluntarily surrender the penthouse in New York and the house in the Hamptons to satisfy a portion of that debt. You agree to vacate the premises within 7 days. And you agree to never contact me, or Aura Bio, ever again." Sylvia stared at the paper. "But if I sign that I will be homeless, I will have nothing." "You will have your freedom," I said, "and you will have your son. That is more than most people get." I looked at the police officer, then back at her. "So, here is your choice. Sylvia, option A. You go with Officer Weber right now. You will likely serve 3 to 5 years for fraud. By the time you get out, I will have foreclosed on your houses anyway." I paused. "Option B. You sign the paper. You leave here tonight with Ethan. You go back to America. You find a small apartment. You get a job. And you live the rest of your life knowing that you are free." Sylvia looked at the handcuffs. Then she looked at the document. She looked at the luxurious lobby she had wanted to claim as her own. She looked at the broken things she had mocked. Realizing that she was the one who had been shattered, tears streamed down her face, ruining her mascara, turning her into a tragic clown. "Give me the pen," she whispered. I handed her a pen, a cheap, plastic ballpoint pen. Sylvia signed. Her hand shook so badly that the signature was barely legible, but it was there. She signed away her dynasty. She signed away her pride. She signed away the false life she had been living for decades. I took the paper back and checked the signature. Then I nodded to Officer Weber. "Thank you, officer. I believe we have resolved this matter internally. There will be no need to press charges today." Officer Weber looked disappointed but nodded. "As you wish. Doctor? Hartwell. But if she returns—" "She won't," I said. "She cannot afford the plane ticket." The police left. The silence returned. Sylvia stood there, stripped of everything. She had no house, no money, no friends, no status. "Go," I said. Ethan finally moved. He took his mother's arm. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. The shame was too great. He led Sylvia toward the door. She stopped at the threshold and looked back. She didn't scream this time. She didn't curse. She just looked at me with a hollow, haunted expression. She realized, finally, that she had never been the queen. She had been the jester. "Goodbye, Alina," Ethan whispered. "Goodbye, Ethan," I replied. "Take care of your mother. She is your responsibility now." They walked out into the snow. The wind caught the door and slammed it shut with a finality that echoed through the entire building. Clang. It was done. I stood alone in the lobby. I looked at the divorce papers on the desk. I looked at the quitclaim deed. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't a triumph. It was a relief. Deep, cleansing relief. I picked up the documents and walked toward the shredder behind the reception desk. I fed the catering invoice into it, but I kept the deed. I turned and walked toward the elevator. The master suite on the 3rd floor, the one Sylvia had coveted, was indeed a surgical recovery room. But tonight, I was going to the roof. I needed fresh air. I needed to see the stars. I needed to breathe the air of a world that finally, truly, belonged to me. The parasites were gone. The host had survived, and tomorrow, Project Phoenix will rise. The heavy iron door had slammed shut, sealing the cold and the toxic history of the Sterling family outside. I stood there for a moment, listening to the howling wind battering against the reinforced steel, feeling the silence of the lobby settle around me like a protective blanket. It was over. The fraud, the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, it was all locked out in the storm. Or so I thought. A sudden frantic pounding on the thick glass of the viewing port made me jump. I looked up. It was Ethan. He had not gone to the car. He had left his mother standing in the snow and had run back to the door, his face pressed against the glass, distorted by the condensation and his own desperation. He looked like a man drowning, mouthing words I could not hear through the soundproofing. Mr. Stone, my head of security, stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Shall I remove him from the premises? Dr. Hartwell." I looked at the man I had married 5 years ago. I saw the panic in his eyes. It was not the panic of a man losing his wife. It was the panic of a man losing his safety net. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Open the intercom." Stone pressed a button on the wall. The audio channel crackled to life, bringing the sound of the wind and Ethan's ragged breathing into the sterile lobby. "Alina!" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking. "Alina, please, you cannot do this. Open the door." "It is me. It is Ethan." "I know who you are," I replied, leaning toward the microphone but not moving closer to the door. "You are the man who just walked out with his mother." "I had to," Ethan pleaded, tears streaming down his face and freezing on his cheeks. "She is old. She is sick. I had to make sure she was okay. But I am coming back. Open the door. Alina, I will tell her to wait in the car. I will tell her anything you want. Just let me back in." I watched him. For years, I had interpreted his passivity as kindness. I thought he was a gentle soul who just wanted peace. Now, under the harsh lights of the entryway, I saw the truth. He was not gentle. He was hollow. "Why should I let you in, Ethan?" I asked. "Because I love you," he shouted. "Because we are married. Look, I know Mom is difficult. I know she went too far today. But I am on your side. I didn't say anything because I was scared. You know how she gets. But I am here now. I am choosing you. You are not choosing me, I said, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound, final clarity. You are choosing a warm house. You are choosing the money. You are choosing the path of least resistance. That is not true, Ethan cried. I love you. Alina, I have always supported you. Support me. I let out a sharp, incredulous breath. Ethan, 10 minutes ago, your mother stood on a desk and called me a manager. She called the work of my life a failure. She insulted the people I care about. She committed a felony in my name, and you stood in the shadows. You hid in the bathroom. I didn't know what to do. That is the point, I said. You never know what to do when it requires courage. A man who cannot protect his wife from his own mother is not a husband. He is a hostage, and I am done paying the ransom. Alina, please. Ethan fell to his knees in the snow, clasping his hands together. I will change. I promise I will cut her off. I will never speak to her again. Just don't leave me with nothing. And there it was. The truth, naked and ugly. Don't leave me with nothing. You have exactly what you earned, Ethan, I said. You have your mother. You deserve each other. I signaled to Stone. Cut the feed. Alina Ali. The audio cut out with a sharp click. I watched as Ethan banged on the glass one last time, his mouth open in a silent scream of frustration. Then, slowly, he realized the door was never going to open again. He slumped. He looked back toward the dark driveway where Sylvia was waiting in the cold. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes filled with hatred, the hatred of a parasite that has been detached from its host. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling white void of the blizzard. I watched until the red taillights of their SUV faded into the distance, swallowed by the mountain night. They are gone, ma'am, Stone said quietly. Confirming visuals on the vehicle exiting the main gate. The perimeter is secure. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. My shoulders dropped. The tension that had lived in my neck, a constant companion since the day I said, I do, evaporated. Thank you. Mr. Stone, I said. Secure the facility. No visitors. No exceptions. Understood, he replied, a small smile touching his lips. I turned back to the lobby. The mess was still there. The torn emerald dress lay on the floor like shed skin. The half-drunk glasses of champagne sat on the tables. The smell of Sylvia's overpowering perfume still lingered faintly in the air, but the atmosphere had changed. The door to the rehabilitation wing opened. Major Vance stepped out. He was leaning on his cane, but he was smiling. Behind him came Captain Jenkins, David, and a dozen other patients. They had been watching the monitors. They had seen everything. Is the wicked witch dead? Major Vance rumbled, his voice gravelly and warm. Not dead, I said, managing a tired smile. Just banished to the suburbs of New Jersey. A cheer went up from the group. It wasn't the polite applause of the investors. It was a raucous, genuine cheer. David tapped his cane on the floor in a rhythmic beat. Sarah whistled. Doctor, Hartwell, Major Vance said, limping forward. That was the most impressive tactical takedown I have seen since Operation Desert Storm. When you cut the lights, classic shock and awe. I just wanted them gone, I admitted, walking over to join them. I am sorry you had to hear the things she said. I am sorry she disrespected you. Doc, David said, turning his head toward my voice. We have been called a lot worse by people a lot better than her. She is just noise. But what you said about defending us, that wasn't noise. We appreciate it. Alina, Sarah added softly. Really? I looked at them, my ragtag army of survivors. They were missing limbs. They were scarred. They were broken in the eyes of the world, but standing there, unified in their support of me. They felt more like a family than the Sterlings ever had. Well, I said, looking around the debris of Sylvia's failed party, we have 20 cases of Dom Perignon and 3 kilos of caviar that I refuse to let go to waste, but I have a feeling that is not really our style. I would rather eat an MRE than that fish egg stuff, Vance grunted. I agree, I said. Who wants pizza? The eruption of approval was deafening. An hour later, the alpine rejuvenation spa that Sylvia had dreamed of was transformed into something far better. We had dragged the couches from the staff lounge into the atrium. We had lit the electric fireplace, casting a warm orange glow over the steel walls. The DJ booth was gone, replaced by a simple Bluetooth speaker playing classic rock at a reasonable volume. The local pizzeria in the village below had been confused by an order for 40 large pizzas to be delivered to a top-secret research facility in a blizzard. But for a $500 tip, the delivery driver had braved the icy roads with a smile. I sat on a rug near the fire, holding a slice of pepperoni pizza in one hand and a bottle of cheap local beer in the other. I was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, my preferred uniform. Around me, the room was alive. General Holloway and Dr. Thorne had stayed. Surprisingly, the general was currently sitting with Major Vance, swapping war stories and laughing so hard his face was red. Dr. Thorne was deep in conversation with Sarah, sketching a diagram of a new prosthetic ankle on a paper napkin. The barriers between investor and subject had dissolved. They were just people. Sharing a meal. There was no pretense. No one was trying to impress anyone. There were no fake diamonds, no rented tuxedos, no lies about winter palaces. There was just the smell of melted cheese, the sound of laughter, and the warmth of genuine connection. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Leo, our youngest patient. He was only 19, a private who had lost his leg in a training accident. He was shy, usually keeping to himself in the back of the therapy sessions. He was holding a steaming mug. Dr. Hartwell, he said quietly, I made you some tea. I noticed you didn't grab a beer. It is peppermint. Good for the stomach after stress. I took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my cold fingers. Thank you. Leo, that is very thoughtful. He sat down next to me, looking into the fire. Can I ask you something? Leo asked. Of course. Why did you do it? He asked. I mean, she was your family, sort of. You could have just paid them off. You have the money. Why did you fight? I took a sip of the tea. It was sweet and hot. Because, Leo, I said, looking at the flames dancing in the electric hearth. I spent 5 years paying them off. I spent 5 years thinking that if I just gave enough, if I just shrank myself enough to fit into their world, they would finally love me, or at least respect me. I looked at him. But you cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot buy a family. I fought today because I realized that I was protecting the wrong things. I was protecting their ego, instead of protecting my own dignity, and I was protecting them, instead of protecting this place. And you guys? Leo smiled. It was a shy, crooked smile. Well, we are glad you won. It would have sucked to move to a regular hospital. The food here is better, especially tonight. You consider this family? I asked, gesturing to the room full of wounded warriors and eccentric scientists. Family isn't blood, Doc, Leo said, clinking his paper cup against my ceramic mug. Family is the people who show up when the shooting starts. Family is the people who help you walk when you can't stand. That woman. She wasn't family. She was just a relative. We are your family. Tears pricked my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release. Thank you, Leo, I whispered. I think you are right. I know I am right, he grinned. I am 19. I know everything. I laughed. It was a real laugh, bubbling up from my chest, unburdened and free. As the night wore on, the storm outside began to break. The wind died down, leaving a silence that felt peaceful rather than oppressive. I walked over to the large window looking out over the valley. The clouds were parting, revealing a sliver of the moon illuminating the jagged peaks of the Alps. Somewhere down there, on the winding dark roads, Sylvia and Ethan were driving away. They were heading back to a world of debts, lawsuits, and the crushing weight of their own mediocrity. They would blame me, of course. They would tell anyone who would listen that I was a monster who had stolen their birthright. Let them talk. I turned back to the room. Major Vance was arm wrestling General Holloway and winning. Doctor. Thorne was eating his third slice of pizza. The fear and the toxicity were gone. I had lost a husband. I had lost a mother-in-law. I had lost a social circle that I never really wanted in the first place. But as I looked at the faces around me, faces illuminated by the firelight, scarred but smiling, I realized I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained a home. I raised my mug of tea in a silent toast to the empty mountain. Goodbye, Sylvia, and thank you. Your greed set me free. I turned away from the window and walked back toward the fire. Tomorrow, there was work to do. We had a Phase 3 trial to launch. We had nerves to reconnect. We had lives to rebuild. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and finding your true tribe. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a snowy mountain, a busy city, or somewhere warm and sunny? Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Alina's decision. And if you enjoyed seeing Sylvia get exactly what she deserved, please make sure to subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe, and remember, real family is who you choose.